Hi there, this is Ron Rogers, and this story, okay, it's a little bit off subject. It's not aviation, but when I was talking about aircraft repossessions made easy, this story came to mind. And those of you who like my stories, I think you will enjoy it. Like I said, it's not aviation, it's a little bit off topic, but this has to do with a job I had during college. And I was in college from 1968 to 73. Okay, and this was during the Vietnam War. There were a lot of protests going on, and it was a very, very interesting time, let me tell you. Now, this is the Johnson County, Iowa courthouse, and as you can see, this building is a little bit old, and the sheriff's office, the jail, and the sheriff's residence were behind this building. Unfortunately, I don't have a picture of that, and it's been torn down. It's been moved. They're at a new location. I actually should go back and visit sometime because I'd like to see. I was a radio operator dispatcher back then for the sheriff's office, and I'd like to see how things have changed because the Mark 34 teletypes and all that stuff is gone, and I'm sure it's much more sophisticated. Okay, I'm digressing here a little bit, but when I worked during college back then, we had anti-war protests going on, and they were rather destructive downtown. Okay, a few little places. Now, the red arrow is the Pentacrest, the main section of the university, the five buildings. The yellow points to Iowa Book and Supply. Now, for some reason, the book prices are always high. We've sometimes paid from $6 to $11 for a textbook. I know you're going, man, that's expensive. Yeah, right. Okay. Uh, yeah. But for some reason, they weren't liked on campus, and they tended to break out all the windows, and I'll show you about that. Now, green is where the sheriff's office was. Now, you see, we're only a couple blocks apart from where the protests were, and that's where I work. And the blue arrow there, that's a lumber yard, and I'll tell you about that because they burnt that down, and there was a little story about that. I mean, these protests kind of turned violent, and why they burnt down a lumber yard, I have no idea, but it was part of the campus protests. Now, Johnson County, Iowa Sheriff's Department. My dad had been a fireman, and of course, we knew all the cops and we knew all the people, and I needed a job, and he knew the sheriff, Maynard Snyder, and he said, "Hey, my kid would like a job, so you get jobs by knowing people," and so I was invited to come there and be the radio operator. They needed one. And neither one of these is a picture of Maynard Snyder. I don't have a picture of him, but Maynard was, you would think he looked like a southern sheriff there. Big guy, and smoked a cigar, and he was a character. I mean, he was a no-nonsense guy, and he was just, he was a neat guy to work for. He was a lot of fun, but, he was a no-nonsense guy. And I had a realistic, for the price you paid, it should be more than realistic, but I had a realistic CB radio. Now, I became a ham radio operator, KC0ZN, extra class license, but at the time, like a lot of hams, we started out with CB because it was kind of fun. So I had this little CB radio. It was a 5 watt, which tells you how fast it went through batteries if you actually use batteries. 5 watt, handheld, 23 channel. We had 23 channels back then. They're up to 40 now. And you had a license. KDK 4147 was my license, but I had this little CB radio. And I'm sitting there at home. I've got a nice big Ringo Ranger 2 antenna, and I'm about 5 miles from downtown. And I'm sitting there and I'm flipping through the channels, and I hear that the protesters are using CB radio to communicate. Well, that's kind of interesting. And it's my shift in the evening, and all these protests started to develop in the evening. They actually closed down the campus, and that's a different story. But the protests would kind of get going in the evening. So I had the evening shift, and I come in there, and I bring my little CB radio, and I set it down on the counter. And Maynard goes, "What the hell's that?" And I go, "You might want to listen for just a second." And he's sitting there, and he goes, "My gosh," because you could hear the protesters coordinating all their activities on the CB radio. Now, this is a picture of the Pentacrest. We're looking towards the east here. The yellow arrow there is the Iowa Book and Supply Company. Now, when I was going to school there in the 60s, they had these big glass plate windows and they had stuff on display. And the first year that they had the protest and they knocked out, these always happened in the spring. They busted out the windows and kind of raided the store. The next year they replaced it with the nice big windows. Well, after they got busted out the second year, they decided to come back and put them in with well, essentially block off the windows. They were kind of like stone there, and they had these little display cases there that they kind of almost bulletproof glass where they'd show a little something, but they stayed that way for the longest time. I think I was back there recently, and I saw they kind of opened it up back again. But for the longest time, they just kind of boarded up the windows. I mean, the Vietnam War had been gone for decades, but, they put this together and it stayed. Now, one thing that was interesting is during this whole process, I was listening to them on the CB radio, and of course, I had the sheriff's frequency there, and the sheriffs were involved with the local police in kind of keeping this whole thing under control. Now, it was kind of interesting. I was listening to them; I could hear where they're going, and then I was able to relay to the sheriff's cars and the police information on what was going on, and this worked out fairly well until I keyed the mic at the same time the person on the CB keyed the mic, and everybody heard everybody else on the frequency. And suddenly the CBers going, they're monitoring our frequency, which I thought was funny as could be because, well, okay, you knew that I was monitoring your frequency because you were monitoring my frequency. Well, they disappeared off the CB radios and they actually never came back to it. But let me tell you one other part of the story here that's kind of interesting. They set the local lumber yard on fire. And it was just down the hill from where we were. And it's off the campus by a good number of blocks. I have no idea, but the protesters went over there and they had something against this lumber yard and they set it on fire. I mean, talk about damage. Well, next to it was a house. And it was one of these old houses. Actually, my grade school was just the block over. And it was one of these houses, and both of these aren't actual pictures. I don't have actual pictures of the event. But these houses were there, and the side of the house starts burning because it's next to the lumberyard, which is burning fairly furiously. So the students in there, they're bringing their stuff out. They're bringing their stereos out. They're bringing all their records. They're bringing boxes of goods, and they're putting it on the parking there right next to the street, between the sidewalk and the street, the little space there. Well, I'm standing there. My shift is over, so I'm just kind of going over because I knew this was going on. I'm kind of watching. And this VW minivan pulls up. And the door opens, the people get out, they load all the stereo stuff in it, and they close the door and they drive off. Okay, fine. Then the students come out with some further boxes of their stuff. And they say in general to the crowd, what happened to our stuff? And we said, well, your friends came and picked it up. And they go, no, we didn't have any friends coming and picking it up. So somebody was very opportunistic, decided they were going to get some free stereo and records, and just basically pilfered their stuff. And of course, we witnessed the whole thing. Nobody, got any good information on it. We're just sitting there. We had no idea that these people weren't, involved. It's the whole thing that if you act like you know what you're doing, even though you're doing it in broad daylight, people will assume that, that was your car that you were, getting into and driving off in, and that was friends helping you out. So anyway, that's a brief little story of the protests that occurred in Iowa City, University of Iowa, back in the very early 70s. I hope you found it interesting. I know it's a digression from my normal YouTube channel, and they say don't do that. Don't stay on your theme, stay on that. But I thought you might enjoy this story. Thanks for watching if you got this far. Thanks for watching.